Welcome to Bricks and Bytes Fight Night presented by Track 3D, the first reality capture intelligence platform for smarter construction.
We get to call things different things, but generally they correlate and mean the same thing.
See, but generally does not work when we're talking about construction and contracts. It requires a level of precision and accuracy. KP, you said that humans aren't that accurate. And they're actually quite accurate with the information they're giving at deriving with a high level of precision, ideal primarily with pre-con. If you told them what it takes to build a project, like they can get a high level of precision very quickly. It's actually very impressive how precise they can get.
My view of software is it's generally dead. Just check out Salesforce's stock.
Salesforce stock's dead because Tableau is going to drop $10 billion in revenue. Let's back out that money and then we'll talk about it.
I mean, yes and no. I think a lot of the software that's been built to date and deployed, nobody's happy with. There's not like, oh my God, what would I do without it?
All right, everyone. Well, good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are listening from, and welcome to Bricks and Bytes Fight Night presented by Track 3D, the first reality capture intelligence platform for smarter construction. We're live from the AEC Octagon. And shout out to HVACR who claimed the naming rights for the arena. So it's now called the HVACR Arena for a matchup between Dustin and
You're big when you can sell
Reddy.
arena rights.
Hey, Davis, shout out to Davis, man. I appreciate you you're taking this from us. Okay, so before we get started, a shout out to a few of our other sponsors for today. We have Data Grid, Alice Technologies, Provision, HVACR, and Track 3D, and you can find out more about each of those companies in the show notes of today's recording. But for today's debate, we will be diving into the death of the system of record. Is the dream of a single source of truth dead? Dustin says we need structured cloud data for AI to survive, but KP argues that corporate software is just for the overlords and real work lives in Excel and WhatsApp. Before we get started, a quick introduction to each of our contestants. Dustin, Cloud Commander DeVan, by the way, you didn't send me this name, I made that one up, is one of the most decorated CEOs in construction tech, successfully exiting Building Connected for $275 million before joining Ediphi as CEO. And KP, Chaos King Reddy, serial entrepreneur, founder, investor, futurist, and proud owner of 48 career experiences on LinkedIn. KP, that's the most I think I've ever seen of anyone. And in today's event, we'll be splitting this into two main sections. And so in section one, we'll be talking about the death of the system of record, which is the key theme for the event here. And we'll be going into a few rounds. So round number one, are centralized systems of record dying under their own weight? Round two, Excel, WhatsApp, and the general user tools versus the cloud. Round three, what's the expiry date of data? Round four, the art and science of pre-construction. And then we will be going into another section where we will take a different spin and talk about business building. So the value of venture capitalists in AEC today, ideal revenue figures to get venture funding right now, and KP's and Dustin's personal thoughts on building great businesses. Then if we get time, we'll open the floor for some questions. I'm sure people will have some points as we go through the discussion today. We'll open it up. And we'll wrap up in around about 45 minutes or so. Key point, as with each of these debates, there's no right or wrong answer. Each contestant offers their viewpoints, and it's up to you as the audience to draw your own conclusions. Okay, Dustin, KP, are you ready?
Yeah. By the way, there are right answers.
Yes, I would debate you on that one.
Oh, love it.
You were wrong. There are right answers. But you were happy to disagree and be wrong.
Very true. Okay, cool. Well, look, Dustin, why don't we start off? Dustin, give us a little bit of a quick introduction to you and your points, and then we'll go to KP, and then we'll go into some questions.
Yeah, so I think most people know me that are probably going to be listening to this or know my story. I was a general contractor. I founded a company called Building Connected that did really well. I ran construction strategy at Autodesk. I've been an angel investor in many contact companies. I'm currently running Ediphi, which is a pre-construction system of record, primarily estimating, but more managing what is the cost of a project across the entire pre-con lifecycle. And let's see, studied mechanical and aeronautical engineering and actually did some work in combinatorial mathematics, which is very applicable to when we're talking about language models. And how this debate came across is that I posted on LinkedIn that companies would be better served if they implemented systems of records before trying to adopt LLMs. And I compared it to people who take Ozempic pills and find it's the magic pill, and then they're going to get off it and realize that they're not probably going to keep the weight off. Bottom line is language models are probabilistic. And in construction, we write contracts. We need systems of record that are audible, traceable, and we need to minimize the likelihood of errors. And as you start using more and more language models for more and more of your work, you're going to have more and more things that are error prone. So language models improve human efficiency. They are not systems of record. And when you are dealing with contracts and enterprise businesses, you are going to need a system of record that is immutable, that is auditable, that when we go to litigation, and I was a part of the largest lien in American history, $400 million in City Center in Las Vegas, you better have a system of record if you want to actually get through that and get paid. So as soon as you start using language models to do all of your work, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Now, one of the reasons why you're not going to survive on saying, hey, Excel is our system of record and email is our system of record, is now it's up into interpretation. And if you've ever been in ChatGPT and asked it a question, you're like, what the hell is that response? Well, that's the kind of stuff you're going to get. If you don't have a system of record, the math isn't going to math, the reason's not going to reason, and inevitably you're going to have people with low construction knowledge trying to do things based upon the language model and not learning on the fundamentals of the industry. So that's where I stand.
Nice. Okay, cool. Thanks, Dustin. KP, do you want to do an introduction and maybe respond to some of the points, and then we could go into a bit more of a structured question?
Yeah. KP Reddy, second generation civil engineer. I've been building stuff since I was a kid. I was fortunate enough to take a company public, did a bunch of stuff in BIM, but most recently just have been investing through Shadow Ventures, where we invest in construction tech. And we're backed by a lot of leading engineering and construction firms as our LP base. So I think there's a couple things. One, LLMs, as we know them today, are literally, over decades, we've built ways to talk to the compute, whether that's through punch cards, software, et cetera. And so my general broad point of view is in LLM, that the computers have finally learned our language, hence the language model. So we are able to talk to the compute, and the compute is able to talk back to us. That's at its baseline. So it is an interface to the compute. I think the challenge around thinking about systems of record is much like early days of internet, was your systems of record did not have to exist in the application itself. Your systems of record could exist outside of the applications. And I think that when you look at what's happening with LLM, so I think when we talked about this, like while we disagree on nuances, we probably generally agree on many things. I don't believe the system of record has to exist in the application, i.e. in the interface to the data, which means it won't exist in the LLM. It doesn't have to exist in Procore or whatever else. And then, in fact, while you talk about litigation, as I've been in plenty of those, right? Our industry is design, build, operate, litigate. That's our entire life cycle process. So I don't think there's anyone on this call that hasn't been in some form of litigation in our industry. And so I think it's not just that litigation and discovery exists in a system of record, it exists across everything, right? And I think, so you can discover people's Excel files and like you look at now with like the Zoom calls and all these AI assistants that jump on your calls, that's one of the biggest concerns people have, is that meeting minutes are a deliverable, they're discoverable. And if someone looks at a Zoom call transcript and nobody reviewed it and, basically said, hey, this is correct, there's concerns that, that could actually be the meeting minutes, even though nobody really signed off on it. So I think that's where I've seen a lot of these GCs just turning off all the AI assistant stuff. So the point being is systems of record, as we start evolving, systems of record can exist independent of software and independent of process. Hence, any kind of, whether you think about blockchain or any other methods, there are ways. You're already seeing it with compliance software where maybe that system of record actually needs to be a third party. So it's not even like that you get to keep the system of record. There's actually a third party managing the system of record. Which you're already seeing businesses developing in that manner too, to say, hey, you can't really own your own, like you can't manage your own systems of record. Let me manage it as a third party. And then we know it to be quote unquote true. So I think the my point being is systems of record are evolving. I don't think to date our industry, because we are, we're not some big enterprise in a closed loop system, right? The data exists in many places, not just in one. If you're Coca-Cola, you might have SAP as your ERP system, and everything that happens in Coca-Cola exists on that ERP system. For us, projects are temporary, teams are temporary, people are temporary, everything is temporary. And so all that information kind of goes away.
Let me
Mm.
let's KP, let me ask you this. So the original LinkedIn proposition was that companies that have systems of records, and we'll use applications as interchangeable for systems of record for right now. Although a system of record is more of a database with a schema that is agreed upon and standardized across the organization. But we'll use application interchangeably for today's environment. My my conjecture was that companies that have systems of records in place, in i.e., standardization across their organization, standard operating procedures, and how they are going to have better success adopting and utilizing AI. Because one of the things when you use a probabilistic language model is garbage in, higher chance garbage out. And so by having things that are structured in a digestible manner that is all agreed upon across the organization allows the language models to make better inferences and reduce the probability of errors. Do you not agree with that?
I think there's a couple things. When you think about a system of record, it's actually a table with a time domain, right? So everything, think of it more as a journal versus, which databases are just tables, right? So, but you have to look at the time domain aspect of it. And sometimes location domain, as we're in our industry, is very important. Not just when did this happen, where did it happen, becomes a pretty important variable for our industry. I think the idea of pre-structuring and process is this idealistic view of the world that does not exist in our industry, because what that means is you now are going to push a standard down to your sub, down to your trade, down to everyone that's working on the project writ large, that is less enforceable and less valuable. In other words, if you give people process, the human instinct is you give me process and I'm going to try to find a way. I'm going to tell you like, oh, that's not how we do it, kid. Right. That's what you end up with. When I was a young engineer, that's what I heard constantly was like, oh, that's not how been doing it. So I think the idea of process and data don't have to be necessarily connected, because you have great ontologies and semantic models that you don't have to standardize. Hence, like the ontology and the semantics derive the conclusions, and you don't have to always follow the same process, which I think is much more applicable. If we were all factory workers sitting on a factory line pushing a button every 5 minutes, then standardization in process, I think in many ways, we are all skilled labor, and whether it's knowledge workers or in the field, which means we do have skills and we have skilled labor, doesn't mean that we do it exactly the same way as the next person does. And I think the whole point of and by the way, LLMs being a minor part of AI, right? So I think that's also something to construct is if
Mhm.
you look at semantic and ontologies, you don't have to be as structured, and you can still get the same information.
Yeah. KP, could you maybe give us an example of like perhaps a use case of what you're describing that might be applicable in construction?
Yeah. So I think, the way you describe, the simplest of example, and then I'll talk about construction is, you know, grapes are red, wine is red. Wine comes from grapes, right? So those are all relationships. And you can decide to call something fermented grape juice, and someone else can say it's red wine. And then within red wine, there's subsets of Cabernet and whatever. I'm not a wine person, by the way. I'm making it up. Um, but there are different points of view of how people call something. Even like think about across in different countries, right? Like we call things different things. And I think there's also a granular point of view when an owner looks at when an architect, let's pick on architects, when an architect looks at a wall, it's a wall, right? It's either a BIM, it's either a family object, or it's lines on a piece of paper. That is their definition of what a wall is. When you talk to a GC, oh, that's a sub or a trade that built a wall. When you trickle that down to the guy in the field, it's a piece of drywall, tape, and screws and mud. So, but those are all the same thing. So contextually, they're all the same thing. And the whole point of an ontology is to be able to make sense of those things. And, I've spent 15 years working on ontologies. And the problem with our industry is it's just so deep. It's so big. I mean, I love it when people outside of the industry go, oh, I mean, buildings, we've been doing that since the pyramids. Like, it's like, let me tell you, like, how complicated it gets. You think about, I mean, I studied the carpet industry for a year for a big carpet company, and it was like insane, all the different nomenclature and how people look at things differently and what the variables and what the constraints are to each thing. So, my point being is that when you look at ontology and how you build these semantic systems, that's the point. We get to call things different things, but generally they correlate and mean the same thing.
See, but generally does not work when we're talking about construction and contracts, and it requires a level of precision and accuracy. Otherwise, you create unacceptable risk in an industry that has extremely low margins of error. So that's the problem with saying AI can be and can surpass and can take the place. Until I mean, the best models right now, what is their error accuracy rate? And then if you compound those, let's say you have a string of probabilistic events that are all dependent on each other, and you're running those thousands of times, you are 100% going to end up with errors in what the AI says versus a deterministic framework. And so you're also talking about ontology, so conceptual, like specifically if a company wants to
Ontologies are not
use,
conceptual. It's
well,
the
look,
basis
if
of
a,
machine
but
learning.
you're,
But okay.
but if you have a company that has no standardization, are you saying that they would be better off just adopting AI and just allowing everyone to figure it out? Or are you saying that they should build some systems of record and some sort of ways of doing businesses and some sort of standard operating procedures? Because that was my disposition for the beginning.
My point is like I don't think it's necessary. I think you can literally leverage the data you have to build structure, to build ontologies, to build knowledge graphs, right? If you look at how do you build a knowledge graph, it's both easy and difficult, right? I can mine someone's email box and start building a knowledge graph of how they do work, right? And I think this idea of like precision, we're also saying like competitively, who are we trying to compete with? The humans, right? And we're trying to say that like, and I don't think it has to be that AI, whether it be through a knowledge graph or whatnot, is less or more accurate than a person. We know that people are not that accurate. And we also know that, not all superintendents are the same. We know that people have a lot of variability into it. So even when you build process standard operating procedures, to what level of detail, right? Because I think, I say there's robots and there's meat robots. Meat robots are very unpredictable, right? You can build a standard operating procedure, but will people actually follow it or do they adapt it, right? Or do they change it? So I don't know. I think when we start thinking about these accuracy and somehow it's AI takes over people, I think it's kind of a pure learning situation. I think AI learns from people and people learn from AI. It's not a one-way street. And I think when we think about precision, risk, et cetera, you know, every industry has lots of risks, right? Every industry has lots of risks. It depends on where you're sitting, right? The medical industry has a lot of risk. yet we have little robots that can peel a grape and do surgery, right? So, and most doctors, surgeons will tell you, like, oh my God, it's changed how we can do surgery by having the robots. So I think when we start thinking in a very binary approach about it's robots or people, we kind of start to miss the point, right? So my point is, like, what is a standard operating procedure other than it matters what matters is the level of detail and how you organize data and how you infer what's important from that data through knowledge graphs or building ontologies is what we're doing in AI. Nobody's just like running LLMs. I mean, I don't like that doesn't make any, I mean, that's why like all these startups, which we'll get to later, all these LLM wrapper companies, that's why they're doomed in many ways, is because of exactly what you're saying is they're saying that AI is LLM. And I'm saying LLMs are like 5% of what I do. LLMs are tiny, tiny in what we do. There's so much more around the construct of AI that I think the fixation on LLMs being inaccurate. I had someone tell me the other day, oh my God, these LLMs are hallucinating. I'm like, you're fucking hallucinating. What are you talking? Like, like, of course, I've seen you at the bar, like you hallucinate too. So I think this idea that like it's either or is problematic. And I think the construct of LLM being AI is one of the biggest misses that people are not working on.
So you once said to me
Dustin,
that we
before
need.
just
Yeah, go
very
ahead.
quick response, and then we'll try and conclude this
Yeah.
bit. Okay, like just to wrap up both your arguments in the context of the first question that we said here about whether the incumbent and monolith ERP systems, you all know the names, SAP systems, I think you referred to them as KP as well earlier. Where do you think this leaves those players? On one hand, I think Dustin, you would say it's important because all the data within those systems is structured, and AI needs the structured data in order to have its be effective. And KP, you're arguing perhaps to the contrary, where it's much more semantic and perhaps run at more of a project level versus this ERP um, arena. So, Dustin, what's your views on
Okay.
this?
Well, I think that this is very, very. You need to be very specific in what we're going to say, but broadly, I do think that uh, the will still have application systems of record, but many of their moats will be eroded in different ways and disproportionately for some over others. I do think the interface of how we interact with our systems of record will change. That's the KP's point. And I think it will be much more agentic. And so all of those things are subject to change. However, we are still going to be reliant on a system of record because of mitigating risk, liability, and contractual structures that exist in construction today. And, KP, you said that humans aren't that accurate. And they're actually quite accurate with the information they're giving at deriving, like with a high level precision, like I deal primarily with pre-con, the cost of a project. And the reasons why costs vary a lot is actually unknown to them at that time. But if you told them what it takes to build a project, like they can get a high level of precision very quickly. It's actually very impressive how precise they can get and how they think about these things conceptually and how they structure their data, not just for them to digest internally because they have standard operating procedures and they know how to mitigate that risk because they've organized how they think about a project, but they're able to provide that information in whatever context they need to a client or to a subcontractor, because that's what they do all the time. And then having processes for that is very helpful. So I do think that interfaces change, systems of records will exist. Applications have built systems of record over time. That is going to be very hard for these AI wrappers to disintermediate. Now, what KP was saying is it's not either or. I agree. I think the companies that are going to win long term are the ones that make you more efficient in your system of record versus I'm going to try to build a new system of record while providing you an AI wrapper, which is the two approaches we're kind of seeing in the market today.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think my view of software is it's generally dead, right? And if we think construction is a laggard and a laggard of other industries, just check out Salesforce's stock, right? I mean, I think people say, well, the stock doesn't mean the business. I'm like, the stock does matter because that's what the market's saying the value is. And so I think And you guys will start to see some stuff that I got briefed on.
Salesforce stock's dead because Tableau is going to drop 10 billion in revenue because it's a BI tool. So
Right.
if you pull out that revenue, Salesforce as a system of record's not going anywhere. So let's back out that money and then we'll talk about it. It's not going anywhere as a
Yes
system
and
of record.
no. And I think if you look at um, if you look at where software is going, and I also think our industry, because it's so different. It's a big industry with different needs, right? How you build a nuclear power plant is very different than how you build a tilt-up panel warehouse. And I think a lot of the softwares that's been built to date and deployed, nobody's happy with. There's not like, oh my God, what would I do without it? And so I think as you start looking at the ability to interface with compute in the way that you want to interface with compute, I don't know that it's a single ERP system. Um, I, I mean, I'm just fortunate. I get to see a lot of stuff that people are working on, and even new ERP systems where they think about these, where they just think about software very differently. But really, the idea of like the software, the ERP system, will it hit? Will it hit big companies? It takes time. I mean, I almost bought. I don't know if y'all remember Lotus Notes and Domino. I almost bought that business from IBM a decade ago. And when I got the call, I was like, "Who is using Domino? Like, what are you talking about?" It's doing 150 million a year. Lotus
Mhm.
Domino. I was like shocked, and it's like you start finding out it's like this tire distributor in Germany. It's, so there will always be laggards. It's not like in the entire industry flips a switch into something, into a new construct. But I do think, generally speaking, um, I think you're going to see more and more of that, especially with startups right now. It's really hard to get your head around investing in a software startup or a SaaS startup right now.
Mm. I would echo. I think KP, what you're saying is reflecting what's in the news at the moment about software stocks generally going down because of the fear of AI and whatnot. So um, I mean, there's something there. Should we go into what your guys' thoughts on Excel versus like cloud tools? And I know KP, you're particularly bullish on things like Claude Cowork, and I know recently they announced the Excel integration. So, um, Dustin, if you said previously when we were discussing this before that there's tons of Excels that exist and companies have like loads and loads of data in all of these Excels, but question the value of any of this data that exists within tools like that because it's unstructured and et cetera, and very old. Um, but KP, very curious. Give us your take on the Excel spreadsheet, and maybe we don't just have to fixate on Excel. We could talk about other apps at the user level, like WhatsApp and those kind of things. But just give us your viewpoint on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think first principles are files or tables, right? And that's just how it is. And so when you look at how people like use Excel and the comfort, there's a reason why Excel continues to exist. And I think people like the freedom of being able to understand things through Excel. And I think when you look at some of the progress that's been made, which is fascinating that Anthropic has made more progress with Excel than Microsoft has. It's quite fascinating. And what you're able to do, I think, there's this thing that people do in our industry where they do a lot of their heavy lift in Excel, and then they put it in whatever system corporate allows them to do. Um, you talk to somebody, and Dustin, you probably talk to more estimators than I do. Like, go delete Excel from everybody's machines and see how they react, right? I mean, people are still spending a lot of time in Excel because I think there's two things in the human condition is that we love getting knowledge, but what we really crave is understanding. And it's really hard to get to a point of understanding when you can't see behind the curtain. And I think Excel allows people to have some visibility of how things work and helps them gain a better level of understanding of their work and what they're doing. Um, which is, I mean, it's not that you can't do it in some SaaS software, but I think we're um, we're reaching a point where even if you look at APIs, right? You look at APIs and cloud APIs, and you look at like MCPs and what you're running, call it client side, reboot. Everything goes cloud to client server, back and forth, back and forth. But I think if you look at what you're doing client side with MCPs, I mean, I have like multiple machines. My CTO thinks I'm insane because I keep buying machines. But what I'm running local in the local condition as an MCP server across Excel, across everything I have locally, and what I'm able to interface via the cloud, I mean, you're now building your own APIs. Very simply, you're building your own APIs. So I think if you're comfortable of an interface of Excel, Excel may indeed be your interface to everything you need if you're using some of these new technologies. So you can sit there and run an MCP to go scrape a website for cost data or pull it off of someone else's SaaS software. Oh, I need to pull some stuff off Bluebeam. I can pull some stuff off Bluebeam and drop it into my Excel sheet. So I think the limitations of Excel that we've seen in the past are starting to really free up. And I think people love their Excel. I mean, I think you can take away a lot of things from people by taking away Excel. I mean, they keep trying to tell me to use Google Sheets around here, and I won't do it. Like I'm
I
not a
felt the same
child.
pain.
I need Excel.
Dustin, what do you think of this?
So many thoughts because he touched on a lot of things that are really important. First of all, I think APIs are going to be dead. So there's going to be no need for APIs. We'll have MCP and agents transferring data to whatever applications you're using. I think Excel is the greatest software ever built. And I think it's undisputed king. And more people have Excel downloaded on their desktop than any other. I guess Microsoft Word might also be there, but whatever. More people use Excel than any other solution. And I've talked to probably more estimators than any person ever between Building Connected and Ediphi. Excel is the best estimating tool for a team of one for one project. Its value gets diminished and eroded over time with the more people that participate in any one project and the more people that are part of your organization and the more distributed your organization is. Could you, using Claude Cowork, actually fill all the gaps and make Excel work for your organization? I will acknowledge that is probably a possibility. That also inherently means you're taking on the risk of managing that infrastructure, making sure the data is organized and structured, and the liability. One of the things a SaaS company gives you is liability, risk management, monitoring, SLAs, a whole bunch of assurances, because you need to focus on building, not managing software applications, because that's the last thing you want the liability for in your organization. So yes, there will be many ways that people can get from here to there. And the possibility of creating your own Excel Ediphi, you building a bunch of Claude. Why? That's not how you generate revenue. Construction makes money by winning the next project. They don't make money by saving money on software. Let the software experts build the best things. And there's stuff we're working on that whatever you're doing in Excel is not going to also help you with how we're trying to not just help your team estimate, but help you communicate across all project stakeholders. So I actually think software applications, if you're just an internal tool, your value is degraded very quickly in today's environment. But the more you support collaboration and communication, both internally and externally, having those network effects makes you very hard to disintermediate, because you do need like a canvas where people are agreeing on what is true. So I think of tools like Notion or Figma. I love those tools. I don't think those applications are going away. I'm buying more Figma stock. You might disagree with me,
No,
but
I love Notion. Notion's like second to Excel.
okay. So Figma is getting smashed too. I probably buy more Figma today if it's down. I haven't checked the market, but it's the most amazing design-centric tool. And look, is there rapid prototyping done with some of these AI tools? Yeah, but like the level of
Are you running Figma on your MCP on your local cloud cowork?
No.
You should. It's like
Good
crack, man. It is crack. I'm
Do
telling
you have a day job still investing, or is it?
Yeah, I do. I'm up at 4
Hey guys,
a.m., man. 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. is my time.
yeah, by the way, KP responds to messages at some ghastly hours, by the way. I'll have to vouch
Yeah.
for that. Quick one. I think people will be very curious on your two views on data. So we hear a lot in this industry about like there's years and of data available within construction. Yes, it's in varying forms, drawings, Excels, WhatsApp messages, paper, blah 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 blah. But what do you believe, or what do each of you believe is the expiry date of a piece of data? Is data from, let's say, 10 years ago still relevant, or is data from a year ago the only data that you need in order to build a successful AI platform on top? I think KP, you went first last time, so Dustin, you want to go first this time?
Yeah, and we did briefly discuss this before. So I will amend what I said originally because I thought about this a lot. I actually think there is tremendous value. It does degrade over time, but the time decay is actually slower than I initially thought because I started thinking about projects that I've been a part of. And while no two projects are the same, any one company, though, can't, in the term of 1, 2, 3, 10 years, do enough similar type projects to not want to still use, and I'm not talking about cost data, but logic on how that project was thought of from a scope, like in pre-con, like what value engineering or alternatives were considered for that project? How was that project executed from like a logistics standpoint? Some of those things are valuable. Like anyone who was on City Center in Las Vegas, just a project I was on, logistical nightmare. But the wealth of information of how 10,000 people came together to work on, like, I think it was 27 individual projects with a wrapper of a gigantic GMP. Like there is knowledge in that project even now, and that project was done 20 years ago, right? So projects are valuable. Some of the value decays over time, but the only company that's even built a nuclear power plant's Bechtel. They would argue that, hey, we know the sequencing of building a nuclear power plant. And I'm sure that that is still very valuable if we want to spend some up. Now, is some technology going to change? Yes, but there is some knowledge there.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think we're generally, I think when you take means and methods, anything related to means and methods, assuming the means and methods have not shifted over time, so when we look at a subcontractor, are they hanging drywall today the way that they hung drywall 50 years ago? I mean, possibly. Right?
Possibly.
Possibly, right? So I think if there's a change of means and methods, I think then that data decay to that, like it doesn't mean as much because like, oh, we don't do things that way, right? Cost data, obviously, like that's a constant variable. I think what's also interesting, when I talk to especially GCs that talk about like they're estimating, like, oh, we have our system and we do things a certain way, and it's like our system is very unique, and it's like, oh, well, maybe, right? I do think sometimes at a GC level, because they're not in the weeds on, because so many of them don't self-perform, their data, their in their point of view, the means and methods are different than like the sub or the trade. But I think when it comes to cost, availability, I don't know that you maybe it's the point is like how you do the work might be relevant if it's still relevant, but the other
Sure.
variables around cost and availability and those type of things is
Yeah.
probably not that relevant. So I think this came up when, when I have these CEOs tell me like, we've been around for 100 years. Our data's worth so much. And I'm like, well, until someone gives you an offer on it, you know, if that was the case, then some other GC would be buying you just for your data, right? Like, and pay you a lot of money. Don't know if that's the case. It is interesting though. I don't know if you guys hear about this, but there's this whole like conspiracy theory, which might be true, because that Autodesk has all our data, Procore has all our data, like, they all have our data, and they are in fact leveraging that data to potentially go into our industry. In fact, Bentley has some provisions, some non-compete provisions where the customer can't compete with. I mean, it's bizarre, right? But there are a lot of people that believe this. And what's interesting about that is the corollary. Like, why are they worried? Do they believe that do we believe that if Autodesk and Procore have all our data, that they're going to either build the biggest design firm in the world and compete with all of us, or that Procore is going to build a GC? Because that would mean that the data is everything, right? And I think the whole point is the data is not everything, because otherwise they
Well,
could.
I love this topic. I love this
It's
topic.
a great thought experiment.
No, I actually think it's important because I find it funny when entrepreneurs say they're in stealth. I will tell any investor, any potential competitor exactly what I'm doing. Because if knowing what I'm doing is the only thing stopping you from beating me, then you were going to beat me anyway.
Mhm.
That's a fact. And if
Yeah.
you're so worried about other people having knowledge of what you do that you can't compete with against them, then you're not really in a position to compete.
Mm.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, guys, look, system of record. We spoke about for death. We got 10 or so minutes ago. We'll let people draw their conclusions on what argument which argument they prefer or take viewpoints from. I think it's important as well with both of you here to talk a little bit about building businesses and the world of venture capital within the industry right now. KP, you said on Bricks and Bytes that you believe that 5 million, maybe correct me slightly, this is a quote I got, but $5 million revenue in 18 months is barely venture fundable. Explain that.
Yeah. So I think we have to kind of get out of our bubble of industry, right? In terms of construction tech investing. And, I'm fortunate I see a lot of deals outside of our industry. I love our industry, and, I invest through other methods into non-industry investments, right? So I get pretty good visibility into what's going on broadly. I think if you look at purely from an investment perspective, if I deploy a dollar, you're now competing with Lovable. You're competing with You're comparing yourself with the growth metrics across the board. And it's really tough right now. It's really tough to justify construction tech startups that are not growing at a rate of pace. Because otherwise, why would I put money? If I can put money into something else that's growing to 50 million in 6 months, why am I going to put money into a startup that says, "Oh, we're going to try to get to 1 million in ARR in 18 months," right? And one could say, "Well, the industry is different." I'm like, I agree, the industry is different. I'm just saying that as a pure play investor, as you look at these things and you're trying to make decisions, it's very hard. I also think I'm also going to edit that comment because things have already changed again. I generally think you're going to see a lot of just a lot of capital move out of the software SaaS space and into the hard tech space, which I think is great for construction, quite honestly, because there's so many opportunities in terms of robotics and hard tech. And I think that's what, if you look at our last investments, I mean, we haven't done a lot of software other than Track 3D, which is your sponsor. We really got them going. And I think there's a complexity to their software that was appealing. But when I look at companies that have been funded over the last, call it 5 years, if they showed up to your doorstep today, I don't know that you would. It's just you know, Amazon was venture fundable when they were selling books on the internet. You would never fund someone today that wants to sell books on the internet, right? It's like, oh, you go get a Shopify account, right? So there are things that kind of get commoditized. And the core tenet of VC is the R&D and commercialization cycle. Because if you don't have the R&D and commercialization cycle, it's just called private equity. It's just called building a business. The venture part of venture capital is the risk quotient, not just of market risk, but of technical risk, that you can't actually get things to work, which is where we like to really pay a lot more attention to, because we think the market dynamics are the market dynamics. So when you look at companies that are very much capital light, oh, we raised a $1 million round and now we're going to go to market and blah, blah, blah. Those are just really tough. I think the bar for go to market investments is really tough right now. And I think I'm more doubling down on like, I don't care if you have revenue for 5 years, go solve a big problem, go solve a big technical problem, and then in 5 years we'll blow things up. So I think it's important to understand like, I think these like MVPs for our industry, I don't think MVPs have ever really worked in our industry. I think it's like, it was like a get in the door type of thing because our industry, to Dustin's point, they don't love risk, right? So things have to kind of work and things have to be a little bit more comprehensive than others. So I think you're going to see. I was in a couple meetings yesterday. I mean, the big guys are also just kind of saying like, "Yeah, not interested." Like, we don't see how we get there in terms of the economics of some of these software companies. The other fact being is people are staying private longer, the liquidity cycle in IPOs. So I think there's two things happening. I think where most of us are thinking about our next funds, I think my next fund is probably going to be an evergreen fund. If I'm going to stay in construction tech, I think I need an evergreen fund. I don't think 10 years is long enough in our industry to do anything of impact. And when you're sitting here with a 10-year time horizon to get liquidity, it's just really tough in our industry. So I think you have to, I think there's a lot of shifting a lot of shifting happening in VC. But yeah, I think the growth expectations in SaaS are just very, very high.
Nice. Dustin, any thoughts for you on this?
Yeah, quite a few. I agree with a lot of what you're saying. Where I guess where I disagree is that I think it's more nuanced because there are many companies that have used AI to come to market very, very quickly. And as quickly as you can get to market, you can probably be eroded because you have not created any sort of defensibility.
Yep.
And so that how you measure companies like that is how fast they're growing revenue. That is the mark. And so that becomes their only defensible point. So you can have other businesses. Take Building Connected, for example. I didn't have revenue for the first 3 or 4 years. Our defensibility became how many projects were being invited to bid in this network effect we were creating. So you can have businesses that delay revenue or don't push revenue as hard as they can for creating a defensible moat. It's just a different way to defend that business to create value large term. I think the venture community where they get missed is they can't distinguish between the two. There's a lot of bad investors that manage a substantial amount of capital. There are people that I wouldn't even I wouldn't hire them to do accounting for my company that are partners at venture funds. So most of them can't differentiate that. And so in lieu of that, they're only writing checks because the LPs are like, AI, this grew to 0 to 5 in 12 months. And where will it be in the next 12 months? We have no idea because we didn't assess the market. We don't know the defensibility. We didn't know how they did it. In fact, they don't even know how they did it. It caught fire. So I think that there's a lot of moving pieces and components right now. And where things shake out is, are people building defensible moats for their company? Do they understand the markets they're going after, the customers, the interdependency, and what is the likelihood that someone's going to disintermediate them? And I think each one of those is a case-by-case basis. And but look, investors go in waves. They started investing in crypto. KP and I, you were very clear. I've always been very clear. Crypto was a fad. It was stupid. But AI is not a fad. There is going to be very tangible gains here. I think that the intersection of AI with really good applications to have very intuitive systems of records for getting work done and managing processes is where the industry is going. So, yeah. And for all the GCs or subcontractors or designers worried Autodesk or Procore are going to come into your space, please don't worry about that. That would be hysterical.
I brought it up because the whole point of like data is so valuable. It's like, if it was that valuable, if that was all that mattered, of course they could do it, right? Of course they could do it. But
Could they?
I would love to see them try. It would be an amazing like Netflix special watching them try.
Yes.
Let's let the people decide. I would be very curious to hear people's opinions on this. I'm sure everyone has an opinion on this subject. Hey, just to wrap up then, Dustin, KP, thanks for coming. Do either of you have any like following like each of your respective points here? To anything that Dustin Dustin, anything KP said that you has changed your position or made you think about like the system of record argument differently? And KP, I'll ask you the same question as well.
I mean, I think we have maybe overlapping definitions where we
Yes.
do agree interfaces will change. How businesses create solutions will change. But at some point, it will require an interface. It will require a database. It will require tables and files to work cohesively together to solve problems. And the people that can create the best experience for solving problems, and that's what software has always done, is create the best experience for solving problems, are going to be the companies that do very well. And we're just going to see a new wave. No one's safe. You're going to have to continue to innovate. The people that hustle the most are going to be the winners, and the people that think outside the box and use every lever that they can are going to do very well. So yes, interfaces are definitely going to change. I totally agree with that.
I think one of the things that Dustin and I have very much in common is we could be doing other things. He had an exit. I've had it. Like we don't have to be playing in this space. We could be crypto kids in Miami. That wasn't the life choices we made. So I think one thing I think is really important is that we all like respect each other very well for sticking in this space. And that's one of the biggest things I say. Like our biggest issue is attracting really like exceptional talent on the tech side in our space. And I think we all do have like a massive passion for doing better. And I think we all just approach it different. I don't think you're ever going to get people involved in our industry. I will say, I think one of the things that probably has made Dustin very successful is like being on the ground, right? When I tell my Track 3D is a great example. The first year, I was like, you need to go live at job sites. Go live at job sites. I don't want to hear about coding. I don't want to hear about MVPs. I want you to go hang out in a job trailer. And the founder did it for a year. He was like practically like sleeping in his car, driving around the country, going and sitting
That's
at
awesome.
job sites to understand what the hell's going on. And I think if you want to solve problems, not all these problems are happening behind a Zoom screen, right? And I think that's where guys like Dustin is like, yeah, City Center was a total shit show, right? Like those are the best projects, right? If you want to learn something, those are the projects you learn from. And so I think it's really important. I don't think any of us are trying to not do good work per se.
Thanks
Very
for doing
cool.
this, KP.
That was fun.
Guys, thank you so much. I think everyone enjoyed it. I'm sure time is running out. We're past our time slot, and everyone has other things to get on with. Until we're in the physical octagon, then there's no excuses for keeping you beyond your time. So
He just
with
ran
that,
he just ran a half marathon. So in a
that was
physical
before
octagon.
that was before we hit record.
It's 2 days ago.
Not
Who's
during.
counting?
I went for a walk.
Nice. Okay, guys, let's wrap this up. I'll close off with the music, and we'll see you next time for the great debate.
All right.